Hello, and welcome to the Mild Opinion Podcast, episode 12. I'm Lou,
I'm Logan.
and today we're going to be talking about director Christopher Nolan. But beforehand, this is episode 12, and we are completing season 1 of the Mild Opinion Podcast with this episode. So if you've been with us, thank you for listening, and we are not taking any hiatus. We are jumping right into season 2. It is just what we're classifying as the end of season 1. But yes, today we are talking about director Christopher Nolan. He'll be the second director we've talked about on the podcast. The first one was Robert Eggers. And Christopher Nolan, he's best known for some big time movies like Interstellar. He did the Dark Knight Trilogy and movies like Inception, Oppenheimer. So at this point in his career, he's very well known. He's a director who can get a lot of cast members and a lot of budget for his films. So yeah, today we're gonna start off just talking about some of his movies. If you've watched some of our previous episodes, you'll know that Logan and I are both fans of the movie The Prestige by Christopher Nolan. And if you want to elaborate on that at all.
Yeah. Well, one thing to say about The Prestige and a lot of Nolan's movies, just in general, is that they're entertaining the whole way through. They give out, really cool ideas and concepts for storylines and stuff like that. And The Prestige plays heavy in that, but also they always wrap up with some kind of cool twist or in a really cool way, and you can tell that most of his movies are just super thought out with what's going to happen, the pacing of the story, the little details are always there. So, and that is done really well in The Prestige.
Yeah.
But also, because I know how when we talked about Eggers, I mentioned quite a bit that he was probably my favorite director, and Nolan's your favorite director.
Nolan
isn't
is
he?
my favorite director.
Yes.
I'm a very big fan of his. I've watched all of his feature-length movies all the way back from his movie Following, which was an hour. I guess you could call it a short film, all the way through Oppenheimer. So yeah, I'm a very big fan of him. I really appreciate his style and the kinds of concepts that he tackles, and just the way he is as a storyteller. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, besides The Prestige, because we've covered that quite a bit in
Yes.
2 or 3 different episodes,
Yes.
what do you think your favorite Nolan film is, since
Yeah.
he's your favorite?
Honestly, I a couple months ago went back through the Batman movies of his, and in any context of superhero movies or movies in general, I feel like it is a basic answer to give, but I feel like it holds up that I think The Dark Knight is up there as one of his best movies. I probably like it the same as The Prestige, just because I'm also a very large Batman fan, and I like Christian Bale and the works that he's done with Nolan, and that movie just is so intense and tightly written, and the themes they explore in it and everything are just so well executed. So I've always been a big fan of that movie since the first time I saw it. And that movie and the rest of Nolan's movies that you go through, every time you watch one of his movies, I feel like there's something new that you can pick up on about it. So you'll have this with The Prestige, you'll pick up on little details that you didn't notice the first time you saw it. And I think that's just a good thing that you can see in a lot of Nolan's films, is something you didn't see the first time, you can pick up the second time through. And then if I'm doing a top 3 ranking here for his movies, I'd probably put The Prestige and The Dark Knight in that conversation as my 2 favorite of his, and then number 3 is honestly a toss up for me between Inception and Tenet, which I know a lot of people struggle with Tenet because it is, and I will admit, it's very confusing. But in terms of it being an action movie, and at least the concept of it, it's very cool. Just, it's very difficult, and I know you haven't seen Tenet, but it's very difficult to wrap your head around what is going on and how the logic of what's going on works. But the concept of it is very good, and it's the same reason I like The Prestige. It's at the ending of Tenet as a very full circle moment which is just so well done and is so like tightly thought out. That I think I'd probably give Tenet the number 3 spot over Inception at the moment. But I'm also a very big fan of Inception just because the concept of that is also very cool, and the cast of that movie is incredible to watch.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd ask you, after The Prestige, what do you got next after that?
Well, after The Prestige, definitely Interstellar for me. I've always loved Interstellar, and I feel like one thing about Nolan's movies, which, for a lot of directors and stuff, the goal is to make you feel like you're like in the movie, like you're part of this world and all that. But Nolan does such a good job because a lot of it, like the themes and stuff in his movies are like wildly different. Like you got Batman and you got, which is superheroes like that.
Yeah.
You have one that takes place predominantly in the outer space and like a future.
You have ones that takes place deep inside people's minds.
Yeah.
Inception. Yeah.
But like the world building for like stuff like that, like what's going on and all that, is always fantastic.
Yeah.
And for me, I feel like I just really like the way that comes about in Interstellar, just because like the whole space thing and the mission is clear and all that. You know what I mean? Like and it gives like, I guess, like a good pacing for like what's happening in the movie and stuff like that. There's like action, there's dramatic spots during the movie and all that.
Very high stakes throughout the whole film.
Yeah.
That's like for most of his movies are extremely high stakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I feel like he does like a really good job on all of his movies of that, just the stakes being high and everything, and having to save either, well, a lot of times it's like the world, but
Well, yeah, in Interstellar, it's the world, and Batman, it's always the fight for Gotham, which also comes down to like a larger idea of whatever the villain's trying to get, and I guess like in Inception, it's just like kind of a heist movie, and it comes down to the stakes of these characters. But I was thinking about this earlier as we were planning to do this episode, is in terms of stakes, and I know you still haven't seen Tenet. But what it comes down to in Tenet is that the stakes at hand is what you initially perceive to be a new form of warfare, but it escalates to a point where you realize that if the villain in that movie has his way, that all of existence is going to come to a stop.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very stressful to watch in the context of that movie, but he definitely deals with some high concepts, and they really shine through, and I feel like his most recent movies is when they come through, so like Interstellar, Tenet, and Oppenheimer, really high stakes kind of stuff.
I think with The Prestige, even though it's like my favorite, that's like the one that has like the least amount of stakes. Like the stakes in that movie are not very high at all, except for, well, I mean, I guess, but...
Have you seen Memento?
Yeah. Yeah,
that's kind of lower stakes in general because it's a very like small story, at least in terms of location and like the subject of it, but it's kind of that movie, at least without going like too far into any one movie here. Memento at least feels the highest stakes because you're not sure necessarily if what you're seeing at any given moment is actually the truth, or if you're being misled to believe something else, which is kind of the whole point of that movie. But so yeah, definitely Nolan throughout all his movies plays with some very high concepts, and sometimes they're really hard to wrap your mind around. But I feel like each time I've gone back and watched those ones that are hard to wrap your mind around, you have more of a unique perspective on it after knowing where it leads to. Yeah,
I agree. And also, I feel like most of Nolan's movies are just like satisfying to watch because of just like you're enveloped in this story. You're like, all right, this is what's happening. And then the more that you go through it, you're like, well, that's kind of odd. And then it gets to the points where you're like, well, in most of them, it's kind of like, wow, like what is happening?
Yeah.
And then it brings it back around, and then by the end of it, you're like, no way.
Yeah. And something, I'll say one more thing about like the way he ends his movies, this is just something I've picked up on, is generally through each of his movies, I feel like each of them come to a resolution that you could call like a happy ending, but there's something about almost each of them, and the only ones I can think of where you could argue that's not the case is like Batman Begins as a pretty rock solid, like Batman saves the day, everybody's happy. Dark Knight Rises is kind of the same deal, and not to say like there wasn't damage done, but almost every other one of his movies and the way that they end, it's not just like a happily ever after thing. It's like maybe the main character got what they were trying to accomplish, but it's usually at like a great risk, and it has a very bittersweet moment of like they had to give up so much to reach that point, or there's just such a like deeper context to the victory that they have, which I've always just really appreciated.
Well, and a lot of times, like you said, like the main character's story or like the main plot line of whatever movie it is comes to a resolution that is like, all right, like that's the end of it. That's a good place to stop. But then there's always like something at the end that you're like, oh, well, like there could be more. You don't necessarily want more, but there could be more. Like the story isn't over, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of people really like about Nolan's movies, like Inception. You know what I mean? The end of Inception.
Spinning top at the
end. Spinning top at the end.
It leaves like that lingering question of like, so it's always something like, did what I just watched actually, like, is that actually what I think happened, or was there more to that? And I think this, I've seen The Prestige 3 times now. Each time I've watched it, I'm like less convinced of like who the good guy is supposed to be, the bad guy is supposed to be, like if there's a trick to everything I'm seeing, and like the more you question the things like that, especially with that movie, it's just like, I don't know. I feel like I'm being lied to at every turn here because these are magicians who are solely lying to each other throughout the whole movie. Yeah. But I do feel like there is a lot of that lingering, like this could go on, or there's a big question at the ending. Which I think is very cool.
I think a lot of the well, even like aside from like storytelling and stuff like that, and the plot lines that are always fantastic, is like he's so diverse in his movies. So like you'll go into it knowing that like, you know, it's a Christopher Nolan movie, so it's going to be good. But you don't have to go into it and be like, all right, well, it's going to be like, it's not always a period piece. It's not always, you know, a superhero movie. It's not always an action movie. Like, you know, there's a lot of times where there's like more to it that's not just a bunch of like stupid fight scenes and stuff like that. Like, and like, you know, like The Prestige, like that was like kind of like a period piece. You know what I mean? And Interstellar was sci-fi.
But like, there always seems to be like a dabbling of different genres intermingling with each other. So like in Inception, it's a sci-fi thing, but it's also a heist kind of spy movie. Tenet is predominantly a sci-fi action movie, but it's also very espionage, CIA kind of stuff. The Prestige even just seems like a straight up thriller drama, but there's sci-fi portions of it too, which honestly I think adds to it. But yeah, there's a lot of texture layers to a lot of his movies, which is really, really cool, and it's great to see that shine through. Yeah. So that's actually a good stepping off point to what we're going to talk about next here, which is he has his next movie coming out, which was announced late last year, I think, which is the Odyssey. And the Odyssey is supposed to come out in July of 2026 at the moment. This movie, in what people were speculating was going to be his next idea or next movie he's going to tackle, did not come up at all, which just gets to show you don't always like pay attention to like rumors and stuff, which we speculated rumors a lot, but I don't think anybody saw it coming as his next movie is going to be the Odyssey, because I do feel like this is kind of a step out of his comfort zone of movies, and I feel like Oppenheimer was too, because it's a biopic. But this one is going from the world of action, sci-fi, thriller, drama, crime, detective movies into fantasy, kind of historical epic kind of territory, which I don't know what to expect with this, but from what we've heard about the filming and such, Christopher Nolan is well known for his use of IMAX technology to film movies, and this especially came through with Oppenheimer. But there've been multiple things come out where people are saying he's using IMAX and a new technology in a way for this movie that people have never seen before.
Oh.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
But it's gonna at least look good. I know it's gonna look good, and he's already got a very stacked cast for it, so it's gonna be something.
Yeah. Do you think that with this movie, it will just be like the same old plain Jane regular story of the Odyssey just told through his eyes? Or do you think that this will have some more of those like key details and like, comes back around in the end kind of moments like he does in almost all of his movies? Because I feel like that's like partially his signature thing. But with something like this, like the Odyssey is already such an established story that it's like, how can you really do that unless,
Well, anytime somebody's adapting some big or well-known story, they'll make it their own. So it'll definitely be, he'll add his own interpretation of things, probably in a way, like, it's going to be different from each person to the next. Like, I read the Odyssey way back in high school, and there's things where they talk about, like, sea monsters they come across, where it's, like, a whirlpool with teeth that's alive, and then they'll, like, go to an island where there's, like, sirens and stuff, and then, meanwhile, back in Odysseus' like, hometown, like, his wife and son are, like, waiting for him to come home, but they're not entirely sure he's still alive, so there's definitely a lot of room for a lot of these open themes and for Nolan to kind of add these little textured thoughts of his own. And something I think you can point to as an example of him doing this and accomplishing it smoothly is in the Dark Knight movies. Of course, this is an adaptation of Batman, who's like a very famous superhero, but the character of Rachel, like Batman's primary love interest, it does not exist in comic books in any manner, any kind of seamlessly intertwines her into the plot. So I feel like there is opportunity for him to maybe throw in a character or two that's not originally there, or an idea of Odysseus's motivations or the situations he's finding himself in. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, I do think he'll make it his own way, in a way where it's not solely copy and paste the Odyssey.
Well, yeah, and I feel like, with that kind of stuff, it is, at the end of the day, Christopher Nolan, and I'm sure that he had thought about this for a while, and he's like, you know what, my next movie is going to be the Odyssey, and he's probably had a whole plan in place for what he's going to do to it, or like how he's going to put his spin on it for years. So I mean, I'm sure it won't be anything short of great, especially with like, one of the greatest directors of all time with a stacked cast.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
What I'm sure
is huge,
going to be like an unlimited budget.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I'm sure it'll be great. I'm sure that this is going to be, exactly what you expect or better. So
Sure.
I mean.
And I mean, with Christopher Nolan too, he's kind of at that status of like, you go see the movie because of, the director's name. So, you have that kind of with like Quentin Tarantino and Martin Scorsese and stuff. It's like you kind of know what you're getting already, which is kind of harder to say with this movie because it's a step out of Nolan's comfort zone. But he almost is like that level of like Tarantino, where he's like a franchiser of his own. Like it's a Nolan movie, so you kind of know how it's gonna feel. So I think it'll be very interesting. Something I think is worth noting here is a lot of the cast for this movie is actors that he's already worked with in a lot of his previous projects. So some newcomers to it are Tom Holland, Zendaya, and John Bernthal, which I think will be very interesting to see John Bernthal in this movie. But as of right now, we know that some of the leads are going to be Matt Damon and Hathaway, who have both appeared in previous movies of his, like Interstellar, and Matt Damon appeared in Oppenheimer as a pretty significant role as well. And then he'll have Elliot Page and Robert Pattinson, who are also two returning members, because Elliot Page way back was Inception and Robert Pattinson was in Tenet. So I think, and of course, there's always room for all these new actors to just be the tip of the iceberg and random cameos and whatnot of people who've already been in his movies. Because that's very much the way, and I know you haven't seen it, but that's very much the way Oppenheimer felt. It was like, oh my gosh, famous person, famous person, famous person, famous person, and then a lot of them are people where it's, oh, they had a bit role in this movie from over here. So I think he's definitely an actor or a director where he has actors in his arsenal that you see them and think, oh, it's a Nolan movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do have very high hopes for the Odyssey, just because, like we talked about, big names, big budget, Christopher Nolan, but also I am curious because, like you talked about, this is like out of his normal range or scope of things that he would do, and I feel like a lot of people kind of said that about like Oppenheimer too.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like now with all of the resources and he's such a big director and everything like that he's kind of just doing that now. He's like, you know what? I'll just whatever I feel like.
This, yeah.
Which I think is kind of cool. So I think it'll be good. I think it's gonna be interesting to see how he does all of it. But I think it'll be good nonetheless.
I think it'll be interesting to see, because he obviously always does pretty grand scale movies, but this is like an epic hero's journey kind of thing through a very like fantastical world. So also just it's probably going to be another very, very long movie.
Yeah.
Because of how long the Odyssey is. But yeah, it's definitely going to be, I can almost say without a doubt, worth the watch just for whatever visually this is going to be.
Yeah.
Especially with people saying he's filming with a new IMAX technology, which I still don't know what that means.
Yeah.
But hopefully that's something where we'll go see this movie and it looks like something we've never seen before, just in terms of the sleekness and fitting his style, because his movies, like we talked about with Robert Eggers, have sort of a feel of, while you're watching it, it feels like you're watching a Christopher Nolan movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was gonna ask you, just in terms of what you've seen Nolan do before, and then knowing he's doing the Odyssey, so obviously open to doing more things in sci-fi, action movie kind of deals. What's something you may or may not want to see him tackle in the future?
Well, we talked about a little bit how he's done, a lot of stuff with like sci-fi stuff, random stuff like that. I think, and this is, a little bit biased, and I know we keep coming back to it, but I wouldn't mind him doing another movie like The Prestige, just because, just like, it was kind of like a period piece, but it also had like sci-fi elements and stuff like that. I think he would do a really good job of doing something like similar, with like also similar to like that like time period and stuff like that. I don't know, maybe like a movie on like, Jack the Ripper or something like that. Make it a little bit spooky, you know what I mean? Like, who knows? Just a spooky period piece or something like that. That'd be kind of cool.
That would be cool.
So I don't know. Anything like that. I feel like that is one thing, because he does so well with like serious stuff and like stuff where it's like hard to wrap your head around. Something a little bit on the scarier side from Nolan, that would be kind of interesting. I think I would like that a little bit. Not like a horror movie, but I mean, like darker elements to a really good story.
Sure. Well, it's actually funny you say that, because a few years ago he did an interview, I think it was right after Oppenheimer, where somebody asked him, like, would you ever consider doing a horror movie? And he kind of gave an answer which I feel like is right up yours and my alley of thinking of horror movies, and we talked about this some in our horror movie episode, which if you haven't watched, go watch it. But you and I really like kind of horror movie concepts that are really different and like really well thought out. And I appreciated his answer to this, which is not like me being like, oh, Christopher Nolan confirmed he's going to make a horror movie at some point, but the answer he gave was that he's intrigued by the idea of making a horror movie, but that it's a very specifically hard thing to make a horror movie that stands out, and that if he was going to make one, he'd want to come up with a very original idea that he was sure he could pull off. So if he ever were to dive into horror movies, which I think is what I'd like to see him go after the most, if he did come up with a new idea like that, I think that would be very entertaining. I'd very much like to see that.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am as well.
Yeah. And then one more thing I was going to ask you is, like, since he's got the reputation of, you know, we're like working with a lot of the same actors, I was gonna say, like, do you have any actors you've seen in a Christopher Nolan movie, or that you'd like to see work in a Christopher Nolan movie, either come back or show up for the first time?
I don't know. I mean, Hugh Jackman, obviously, because main character of Prestige, awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Matthew McConaughey,
Absolutely.
fantastic. I'm trying to think of somebody who I would want to be first time.
Yeah, that is a harder question than I thought.
That's very. It could be anybody. I'm trying to think of somebody who if I saw them like confirmed to be in a Christopher Nolan movie, I'd be like, oh heck yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know, at least for me, when Oppenheimer was coming out and I saw Robert Downey Jr. was being casted in the movie, I was like, that's very interesting, because by that point I'm so used to seeing him as Iron Man and just in action movies, and then he comes in, and in that movie he's a very serious, like, kind of revenge-driven political character, so it was right out of left field, but it's kind of something that makes me not as, you know, like, a lot of people are really uncertain about Tom Holland and Zendaya being in this movie just because they're, like, new faces, but there's been, going way back to, like, The Dark Knight, everybody shook their heads when he casted Heath Ledger as the Joker, and now he's gone down as, like, one of the most famous movie villains of all time. So, I guess with that, I don't think there's anybody he could cast that hasn't been in one of his movies before that he necessarily would fumble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
But also, to go off what you said, the first name that comes to mind that I'd like to see in another one of his movies is Hugh Jackman, because I think he really was a really strong lead in Prestige, and I'm honestly surprised I haven't seen him back again.
That's kind of what I thought about it as well.
Yeah. But yeah, do you have anything else you'd like to touch on with Nolan?
I don't think so. I think I definitely need to take your recommendation and watch Tenet.
Tenet's very good, yes. And this is, I'm probably on behalf of both of us, if we were to recommend a Christopher Nolan movie, definitely watch The Prestige. We think it's underrated. It's a fantastic movie.
Yep.
It's such a fun movie to watch too. But yeah, I think that about does it.
Yep.
So
Season 1.
This concludes not only episode 12 of the Mild Opinion Podcast, but it also concludes season 1. Then we will be back next week for season 2. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next season.